Well, we'll get started. This is Dr. Larry Straub, Associate Professor of Business Management at Newman University Business School. And I am pleased to be joined today by two special guests, Marshall Phillips and Ryan Woods, both members of our Newman University MBA program, specifically our Spirit Aerosystems cohort that we actually run on campus at Spirit Aerosystems, or at least we did before the pandemic kind of sidelined us for a little bit. And both of them were the team that finished first place and won national awards for the business strategy game, competing against universities throughout the country. And I believe it's even a global competition as well. So that's quite a high honor. And I wanted to first start off by congratulating you both on this accomplishment and being one of the top ranked teams in the country. That's quite an accomplishment. Very few teams get that honor, and I think you might only be about the second or so that I know that has gotten that at Newman University. So I don't think anybody's actually won the actual top when they got into the national competition, but we did have some that finished first in some of the categories on a week-to-week basis. So you both seemed from the very start to really appreciate the experience and appreciate this simulation game. I think you're both have engineering backgrounds, if I understand it correctly, and so that might have lended itself somewhat. But I wanted you to talk to me a little bit about why it was that this really juiced you and why you really got into this as much.
Yeah, I'll go first, if I may. I was real excited when he introduced this game as our capstone project, because I saw pretty quickly that it was really going to tie together everything that we had studied and learned in our MBA program. To do well at the game, Ryan and I had to employ a lot of the skills that we learned at Newman University, because it includes marketing, it simulates production, it simulates finance. Now you have to know how to do an ROI analysis. You need to understand leverage. You need to break down your fixed and variable costs. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of moving parts to it. And I saw right away that Ryan and I were going to be strong in integrating those parts, pulling that together into a coherent strategy. And I just really looked forward to going through that. And we worked really hard at it. I think there are something like 90 decision points that we had to enter in every game turn. And some of them were agonizing, agonizing in a good way. That they challenged our thinking, challenged us to question our strategy. Are we taking the right approach or not? And those kind of conversations for me, Brian, were super, super fun and part of what and the enjoyment I took out of the game. And the fact that we got into it at that level, I think, is what kept us competitive and motivated us to really do well at the national event. So that for me, that's my answer.
Yeah, I would just add that, Marshall and I are, both engineers, but we both spent time in program management. And so my current role as the program director for 777 is really very, very similar, ironically enough, to this game. The game is really like you're the CEO of a company, and to what Marshall's saying, it's all about where do you build factories and your labor rates and inventory and tariffs, not to mention all the financials, earnings per share, what's the stock price. So to me, this is what really brought it all home. And there were a lot of decisions, and a lot of it, initially I think was trial and error. And Marshall was phenomenal to work with, built a lot of regression models, and we put a lot of time and effort into analyzing it. But I think a lot of it for us was it truly is real world. I mean, a lot of the decisions that we make are very akin to the decisions that we make every day in our jobs. So I've never seen a game as realistic to modeling real life as the business strategy game. It was a pretty phenomenal experience.
Yeah, I would second that even and just repeat that, Brian. The game really felt like it rewarded sound business judgment and business acumen, and that's something I really appreciated about it. We weren't gaming the system; we were applying knowledge that we had learned. So that's what was good.
Let me ask this to one or both of you. Do you feel like you have a different appreciation of what the folks at the top do now?
Go first on this one, Brian.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. There's a lot of decisions that we made just with regards to where do you build a factory, and in this situation, the really difficult decisions, of having to do layouts and stuff like that. Obviously, you don't see in the game, and so in this case, you're not impacting the real life of people that work for you. However, you could see just how complicated some of these decisions were, and so it did give you the real life perspective, and that you got to continue to kind of fine tune some of those decisions, but it does give you an appreciation that these are not easy decisions to make, and you can very easily bankrupt a company. And I think as people get into some of these decisions and you watch what happens to your stock price and earnings per share with the decisions that you make, if you overstep your bounds on say taking out a loan and those types of things, if it was running a real business, it's real people, and this is probably the closest thing that you're ever going to get to running a company, unless one day you make it to the top. And this is a great foundation for you to understand what it does take to really make those CEO type decisions.
Yeah, you said it, Brian. And what I found myself doing, I think you did as well, is we also we recognized we were playing against other people. There were other people behind our competition, and we would spend some effort trying to put ourselves in their shoes and anticipate what they were going to do, what moves are they going to make, so that we are ready to react or counter them or whatever is necessary. So the game is very good about, like Brian said, simulating a real business. You really are in a market with other people. You're not playing a machine. Other people are behind the other companies. And Brian, I think in our national competition, 2 of them even did go bankrupt and were booted out of the game. So it's definitely possible to make bad decisions and go off the rails there.
Let me ask you this. Being engineers, I would imagine there were advantages to being engineers and playing this game, and there were probably maybe some disadvantages. Did you stumble on any surprises there?
Go ahead, Marshall.
Yeah, I'll take on the advantage side. We were not afraid of breaking down the game into numerical analysis. Like Brian said, we did a lot of regression analysis. We took the data we gathered during our cohort game, analyzed that, and were much more predictive about the behavior of the market in our championship game. And so that's some mathematical engineering tools that we brought to bear that I think gave us an advantage. If there were a disadvantage, it was on my part. Brian doesn't have this disadvantage, but seeing the forest for the trees, right? Once you have mathematical models, it's easy to think you're pulling levers and pushing buttons on a machine. But Brian is good about remembering to see the overall picture of what the strategy is we're trying to do and implement here in the game.
Yeah, I would add the engineering side, like Marshall said, it does help just to be analytical, because there are so many decisions and there is a tremendous amount of data, and you do have to be detailed oriented. And I think if you're not detailed oriented, this game will eat your lunch. But this being a capstone event for a master's in business, to me, I think we had to pull on the elements that we learned on the business side more so than the engineering side, and doing our own cash flow analysis and looking at what are we going to take out for bank loans, and how does your credit score impact what the loans interest rates that you get, and what level of quality are you going to put into your factories? How lean are you going to try and make them? How efficient are you going to try and make them? Those are all production and quality and all the other elements that I'll say work in concert with engineering. And so I think you really have to, if you're not pulling on what you learned in your MBA, this game will really it really take you over. It's definitely a business game.
You both, I think, knew each other fairly well before you came into this experience, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Was there anything? How did you feel like that impacted? Did you play off each other well? Did you have complementary strengths, weaknesses, things like that?
Yeah, I think we got along very well, complementary, as you say. Brian, is really, like I said earlier, really good about the big picture, really good about thinking about strategy, keeping us grounded. What do we need to be focused on? What's extraneous noise? And so we would have typically, especially during the MBA class, weekly meeting. We would review our results and formulate our plans, and then have a final review of our inputs before we submitted for the turn. And I think we really complemented each other strength-wise in those activities. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I think we definitely complemented each other, but I would say we also challenged each other's decisions. We, as part of this game, you have to establish the price point, for instance, just one of the many decisions. And we had a lot of debates on what price point did we want to go in? Did we want to try and undercut the competition, or did we want to really try and maximize the income that we make off of this and the profits that we would make without being stuck with a whole bunch of inventory? And those are really delicate. It's a delicate balance to make those decisions. And so having worked with Marshall for many years in many different roles, I think we continued to balance each other in those types of things, and I think that's a big part of it, right? You got to have some diversity on the team. It's diversity in thought and all the other things, and it's important that both team members are trying to think of it from other perspectives, because and Marshall said this earlier, this isn't a computer algorithm that you're playing. It's your cohort, at least for the first round in the class, and they're the people that and that you've worked with out here for many years, and they're making very similar decisions than you are, and you almost have to put yourself in their shoes, and that has to dictate part of what your strategy is. So having a team member that can really kind of balance you and challenge you is important.
So I think what I hear you saying is strategic positioning was about as important as the actual strategy and the moves that you're making. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. There's the way I ended up thinking about the game is there's two things going on. There's your, like you said, strategic or market position. What is your market strategy? How are you going to position yourself in terms of quality, volume, market share, price, those types of things, in order to be more competitive than the other companies in the market? And then there's the execution of the business. How are you going to run a low-cost business, keep your cost structure down so that your margins can be high? And those are somewhat independent, because you can do different things on the marketing side and still run a certain type of cost structure behind the scenes with your factories and your workers and things like that. So we always, or at least I always, had two thoughts in mind. What's our marketing strategy, and where do we want our company to be with its face towards the public? And what are we doing execution inside our company to keep costs down, to make sure, like Brian said, we're building in the right regions of the world with the right labor rates and things like that. So yeah, those two aspects were always foremost in my mind in every decision we made.
Anything to add there, Brian?
No, I think you said it really well.
Okay. Either of you have anything that you'd talk about it more comprehensively about it, how just your overall Newman University MBA experience, you did this while you're working full-time, you're doing it while you got families, you're doing it while you got a lot of other obligations. How did you find the overall MBA experience?
Yeah, I'll go first on this one, Marshall. I thought the program was great. I know that some of the other cohorts have moved to online, so I can only speak to really the in-class cohort that we did. Having the professors come to Spirit so that we weren't running out of meetings late in the day was extremely helpful. But it's an investment, and you're only going to get out of it what you put into it. And I would say, 2 years is going to go by either way, and it's really up to you determine what you get out of it. You can either get a degree, but you didn't learn as much, or you're going to get a degree and you're going to really learn a tremendous amount. And I would say the business strategy game was that capstone event that really helped for me pull everything together. And so this game was really important for me to kind of, again, tie it all together. But all the classes along the way were really important. And I can see, now post the MBA, now that we're all completely done, I can see how they all tie together. And so it's, again, I would just reiterate, it's all what you put into it. If you put all that, I'll say Marshall and I know, what we did, especially in this game and some of the other classes, I felt like I learned a tremendous amount from the whole MBA.
Yeah, and the best thing I can say about it is that I would do it again, even knowing how difficult it was in certain moments. And it was difficult at this age and stage of our lives to commit the time required, not just for the class night, but to do the homework and the readings and papers and things outside of class.
Yeah.
So a little bit odd at my age to be doing that. But at the end, after I step back and take a breath, I learned a lot. And I'm glad I'm glad of what I learned, and I would go through that again if even knowing what I know on the other end. So definitely a valuable experience. I would recommend it if you can make the commitment, like Brian says. If you're going to do it, commit, and it'll be worth your time.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. As having the good fortune to have 2 classes with your cohort, or I think it was 2 or 3. I think it was 2. But I really, really enjoyed the experience. It's so interesting getting to come out and teach on site at Spirit, to actually walk through the plants, and I'm telling you, during this cohort, you saw it all. Things were booming, things were really going crazy for a while, and then you saw just in real time everything that can happen in business, from the max issues to this COVID-19. You just can never get too cocky. And you just see that firsthand, and you get to experience that in real time with the simulation game. Actually, there were some features in there I didn't do with you folks because I'm learning as I go here too, where you can actually kind of change up the deck and you can throw things like that at people and just really kind of mess with their reality a little bit. And I hope to get proficient enough in that to where I do more of that as we go. But it's a really interesting simulation, and I'm so glad that we're able to do that as part of our program. And I'm so glad that you guys had so much enjoyment, so much success at it. So I think at this time I'll wrap it up, but I wish you both the best, and I hope that you have a long and successful business career at Spirit Aerosystems, and don't ever hesitate to let me know if I can help you with anything.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. You bet.